Hey everyone, this is Villa. I've been having a lot of people ask me for help with Throne of Lies lately, and I decided that it would be a good idea to make a tutorial video showing the basics of the game, so that people would be a bit more comfortable when they go to play their first matches. Throne of Lies is a social deduction game. It's similar to games like Town of Salem, Mafia, and Werewolf. The base concept of the game is that everyone is given a random character that has different abilities, and you have to use those abilities to figure out who the other players are, as well as using clues from what other players say in the chat during the course of the game. The game can seem really daunting at first, but let's start by breaking down the basics. Throne of Lies has three main factions: the Blue Dragon, the Unseen, and the Cult. The Blue Dragon are the good guys, while the Cult and the Unseen are the bad guys. While the class list may look intimidating, only Unseen or Cult can spawn in a single game. To make this a little more complicated, there are also players that are neutral and have their own special objectives. Out of the 16 players at the beginning of every match, 9 to 11 of them will be Blue Dragon. There will be 1 to 3 of the neutral players, always 1 neutral killer, and always 2 of either Unseen or Cult. The King can start as either good or evil. If you have issues remembering this, the game will by default have a little list in the game UI as a reminder. This may seem like the Blue Dragon players have an unfair advantage because there are so many of them at the start of every match, but the Cult and the Unseen have a few things to help them out. One is that the Cult and the Unseen will always know who their allies are and can converse with them privately during certain parts of the game. The Blue Dragon will not know who any of the other players are, with the obvious exception of the King. The second is that the Cult and the Unseen can convert other players to their faction. The Cult can have up to 4 members at the same time, while the Unseen can have 3. This is why it seems like there are an overwhelming amount of classes when you start playing the game and you look at the class list. A portion of that list is what the converted class type is and what new abilities they may have. Now that I've covered the basics of the factions for the game, let's go over the UI. Looking at the UI, there are a lot of things here that are important. Starting at the top is the timer. The timer will indicate how much of each phase is left and show you which day or night the game is currently on. It's very important to always keep in mind how much time is left in each phase, especially during the day, since you have to communicate with other players. In the lower right is a list of all the players in the game. Your name will be highlighted in green. The starting king will always be on the top of the list as number 1, and anytime the king role is changed to another, it will be indicated with a small crown next to their name. Each player after the king is randomly put on the list and assigned their number. Remember that this order is not always the same for every match. If you start on or are converted to the Unseen or Cult, you will be able to see who the other players in your faction are with a symbol and their class written next to their name. Make sure that you don't share this information with anyone. Only your allies, that is, other members of your faction, can see this, so keep this information secret. If you left-click on a player in the list, you will accuse that player of treason, and a notification will show in the chat window for everyone to see. If you right-click on a player, it will open a small window that you can type in to send a whisper or private message. The lower left hand is the chat window. Anything that players say will be displayed here, as well as all system messages such as a player whispering another player, a player accusing another player of treason, how a player votes in certain situations, death alerts, and ability information. Also, at night, there are times where other players can talk to you in private. If you are Unseen or Cult, you can talk to your teammates and that chat will only be seen by other faction members that are in the room at the time. The Mystic has an ability called Link Minds that allows her to talk to other players in a private chat that will bring up another tab in the chat window for you to type in. The Prince will also be able to talk to a player at night, and this chat will be private. If you die, you can talk to other players that are dead, but there is no way for dead players to communicate or interact with the game outside of betting on daily outcomes. In the upper left-hand corner, there are a lot of important buttons and information. The first is your character portrait. If you click on this, you can see your class card with information on your win conditions, your abilities, and tips if you get stuck. You can also access the other class cards here by using the menu in the upper left. Next to the portrait are 3 buttons. The top button opens up your logbook. This is an extremely important window that you will bring up often. It is empty when you first open it, but when you hit the default button on the bottom, it will fill with some information for you. Typically, most players use this, but after you get comfortable with the game, you don't have to follow the exact same layout. On the left-hand side of the book, you usually want to put your class on the top where it says name-class. I don't usually put my name there, but you can if you wish. Below that is a string of letters and numbers. These are shorthand for Night 1, Night 2, Night 3, and so on. Every time you use an ability with your class, you'll want to note it down in the logbook. You can use shorthand to indicate this, but just make sure that it's easy to understand. Always fill this out as soon as you can, since you frequently have to share this information with other players using copy-paste. On the right-hand side of the book is a list of numbers, with the 1 having auto-filled with king, since the starting king is always number 1. This is where you want to keep track of what players claim their class is, and what you might have figured out using your abilities. While you're alive, no one can see your logbook except for the Marshal, who has the Snoop ability, and the Possessor, who can take control of your body. However, you will still want to make sure that you keep a neat and accurate logbook, since other players can view it when you die, and this information can be helpful to securing a win. However, on the other hand, if you're an evil player, you will want to keep actual real information out of your logbook. Never put who your fellow faction members are. Below the logbook is the death note. You can draw pictures of whatever you want here, as long as it's not offensive, and if your player kills another player, your death note will be displayed on their body. Under the death note is the private note. This window is always private, and you can put anything you want here. This is good if you're trying to keep track of something as an evil class, or if you're just trying to keep something private even after death. And perhaps the most important button on the entire screen is the emote button. This button shows how cool you are, and any time that your character is focused on, like when you're accused of treason, using this button will increase your chances of being pardoned by at least 50%. The game is broken down into phases of day and night. During the day, you can talk to other players, accuse players of treason if you think they are evil, and plan actions with other players. Like if someone thinks another person is evil, they may ask certain classes to occupy them that night to prevent them from taking action. A slight side note is that players will use the term claim when they are talking about what players are, or asking what you claim. This just means they want to know what class you are. You'll want to give this information to certain players in specific situations, but always try to claim and post your logbook entries in the chat if you are accused of treason. That might not be the best blanket advice for some situations, but for new players, it's better just to publicly claim if you're accused of treason until you understand the game more. There are some classes, such as the Butler and the Assassin, that can use some abilities during the day. These give private feedback, like with the Butler poisoning the king, or public feedback, like with the Assassin poison notifying the player that they were poisoned. At night, you can use your night abilities. Let's look at the Butler again. The Butler has 2 night abilities, Serve Wine and Concentrated Wine, typically referred to as Party due to the description. When you select Serve Wine, you will need to pick which player that you want to try to serve wine to, or occupy to prevent from taking action that night. You'll get a message in the chat after you select your target. You'll want to note at this time in your logbook what you decided to do that night. Using entries such as Serve 12 or Wine 12 for this Butler situation are both fine. Just make sure that it is something that other players can easily understand. After the timer counts down to the end of the night, you will receive feedback for a number of things. In the Butler example, you will get a message indicating whether you are able to occupy that player or not. If you were killed that night, you will get a message telling you that you were killed and are free to leave the game if you wish. If you were attacked but not killed because you were healed, you will get a message that you were attacked and then one showing that you were healed. If you are converted to the evil faction, you will get a message telling you, and your player list will be updated to reveal your faction allies, as well as your class card being updated to your new class. Any other messages, such as people that redirected you or occupied you, will be displayed at this time. If you are still alive, you will want to note the results of your ability last night, such as with the Butler in this situation, Serve 12, Successful. Sometimes at night, you will not be in your normal room, but in jail with the prince. You will not be able to see what player the prince is, but he will talk with you and want to know what your claim and logbook entries are. The good news for Blue Dragon players is that the prince is always a good guy and you can trust him with your information. But if you're evil, you will want to make sure that your logbook entries are believable enough that the prince won't execute you. This is the part of the game that can be complicated for new players, faking logs, and it takes practice and experience with simply playing the game and understanding the classes better. Next, the game shows all the players that died overnight. There are many reasons why a player will die overnight. The most obvious is that they were attacked, typically by an evil faction player, but not always. They can also die from poison or bleeding if they did not get healed, or the prince could have chosen to execute them because he suspected that the player was evil. There are a couple classes that will suicide if they cannot win, or if they mistakenly kill a Blue Dragon player. Players will not be shown the reason why someone was killed. Sometimes, Blue Dragon will leave a death note indicating when they kill someone, like the prince will put a P on a death note that shows his executions, but this is not always the case and it can't always be trusted. After the overnight deaths are shown, the game will return all players that are still alive to the day court. People will or won't share information, and the game will repeat until a faction wins. The Blue Dragon players will need to kill all of the unseen or cult players in the game, while the evils will need to kill all of the Blue Dragon. There will be neutral killers in the game and, depending on which ones they are, may need to be killed as well for one of the factions to win. This can create some very interesting games where one of the factions has killed the other, but the neutral killers are still in the game and can be very difficult to find. This brief overview of the game will hopefully help you feel comfortable enough to step into a match. Other players can be intimidating, especially if you're new and they're really pushy or demanding, but as long as you read your class cards and try hard to follow the games, you'll improve. Staying in the game after you've died and trying to figure out who is what without the pressure of being alive will also help you, as well as watching streams and asking questions in the chat. It will also help if you join the Throne of Lies Discord, where they run new player-friendly games and have tons of players that will be able to answer any questions you might have. Good luck with your matches and remember to have fun.